Welcome back to Jiang Decoded. I'm Jiang Xueqin, and today we're uncovering the hidden strategic truth behind the July 9th strikes that every major news network completely missed. The entire world is currently fixated on the Strait of Hormuz and the spectacular visuals of the July 9th strikes. If you turn on any major cable news network right now, you are going to see endless loops of United States warships maneuvering through the Gulf and talking heads counting missile interceptors. Every single military analyst and geopolitical commentator is obsessing over the retaliation narrative, talking endlessly about cycles of escalation and whether this is the formal beginning of World War III. But in all of this wall-to-wall coverage, there is a glaring omission. Not one person on any of these networks is asking a single question about a railway bridge located in the Golestan province of Iran, situated just 12 kilometers from the Turkmenistan border. The United States military spent 7 Tomahawk cruise missiles, costing approximately $2 million each, to obliterate a remote railway bridge that nobody in the Western world has ever heard of. I want you to really sit with that fact for a second, because understanding the logic behind that specific strike changes everything you think you know about this conflict. The mainstream media will confidently tell you that this entire campaign was strictly an act of retaliation for Iran's strike on American bases in Kuwait and Bahrain. But what the networks are actively failing to tell you is that this railway bridge actually appeared on an internal Department of Defense targeting list all the way back in April, exactly 2 months before any of the supposed provocations that allegedly triggered the July 9th retaliation. Once you understand why that specific bridge matters and what it physically connects, the entire picture of the July 9th strikes looks completely different. You need to familiarize yourself with the INSTC, which stands for the International North-South Transport Corridor. This is a massive, highly integrated railway and shipping network that physically connects India through the territory of Iran, upwards through Central Asia, and straight into the heart of Russia. We are talking about a trade corridor valued at hundreds of billions of dollars per year, specifically conceptualized to bypass the Suez Canal and circumvent the maritime choke points that Western naval power has historically controlled. That specific bridge in the Golestan province was the single most critical infrastructural link in that entire corridor on Iranian territory. By destroying that bridge, the United States fundamentally cut Iran's land-based connection to Russia and China. This was the culmination of what I call the Two-Scissor strategy. Back in February, the United States and Israel began an intensified air campaign explicitly targeting Hezbollah infrastructure in Lebanon, effectively severing Iran's western supply line. By destroying the INSTC bridge on the northern axis in July, the United States utilized 2 strategic blades simultaneously to aggressively cut Iran off from all its external support networks in one massive coordinated military operation. This was never a spontaneous retaliatory strike. This was a meticulously crafted plan of preventive war designed to permanently restructure Iran's geopolitical standing. This brings us to the events of June 16th and the signing of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, which established a 23-day ceasefire between the United States and Iran. At the time, every major news network heralded this as a miraculous diplomatic breakthrough, and Donald Trump took to his platforms to boast about securing a tremendous deal just in time for the midterm elections. However, looking back at what actually occurred behind the scenes reveals a masterclass in strategic manipulation by Tehran. On the very first day of the ceasefire, Iran received a staggering $20 billion in previously frozen accounts from South Korea, moved as physical currency under a highly obscured side clause. By day 7, Iran began receiving massive overland shipments of drone munitions directly from Russia, routed through Allied territory, completely shielded from United States naval interdiction. By day 15, multiple intelligence assessments confirmed that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had successfully restored the depleted ballistic missile stockpiles to 50% of their maximum operational capacity. Then, on day 18, Iran aggressively deployed new navigation buoys into the Strait of Hormuz, unilaterally establishing a new order for maritime transit while the United States was paralyzed by the terms of the ceasefire. Finally, on day 23, within hours of the ceasefire's formal expiration, Iran launched its devastating strikes on the United States bases in Kuwait and Bahrain. This was not Iran recklessly restarting a dormant war. This was Iran executing a carefully calculated sequence designed from the very beginning. The ceasefire was essentially round 1.5, a tactical pause where Iran weaponized the American administration's desperate need for a high-profile political victory. According to the bargaining theory of war, you do not sign a ceasefire because you suddenly desire peace. You sign a ceasefire when you are materially outgunned in the short term but hold a unique negotiating advantage. Iran expertly converted Trump's political vulnerability into $20 billion in untraceable cash, heavily restocked armories, and 23 uninterrupted days to prepare for the next phase of the conflict from a vastly superior material position. American intelligence completely misread Iran's quiet compliance during those weeks as a sign of weakness and capitulation. They made the exact same historical mistake they made with the Taliban in 2003 and Hezbollah in 2006, failing to distinguish between an enemy that is lying low because they are genuinely beaten versus an enemy that is lying low because they are rapidly reloading. This entire situation is severely compounded by the highly credible intelligence suggesting that Ayatollah Khamenei may have been struck during the July 9th bombing campaign. If the United States actually succeeded in removing the supreme leader, they have likely committed the single largest self-inflicted strategic wound in the entire history of this conflict. Within the Iranian political and theological system, the supreme leader holds a highly specific religious authority known as Vilayat al-Faqih, or the guardianship of the Islamic jurist. Under this foundational doctrine, only the supreme jurist has the recognized theological and political legitimacy to make binding decisions regarding war and peace on behalf of the Shia Muslim community. If you eliminate the one person who holds that authority, there is literally nobody left in the Iranian government who can legitimately sign a peace agreement with the United States. Removing the supreme leader triggers a cascading nightmare of strategic consequences. Without his civilian and religious oversight, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is suddenly operating completely unchecked. Furthermore, you instantly hand every single resistance movement in the region the ultimate martyrdom narrative, ensuring that the war becomes mathematically and politically impossible to formally resolve. When you tally up the ledger of July 9th, it becomes painfully obvious that neither side achieved a decisive victory, thrusting both nations into a brutal war of attrition. The United States inflicted massive physical damage and severed the northern trade corridor, but Iran absorbed the blow while sitting on billions in fresh capital, a restored arsenal, and an unchallenged maritime dominance in the Strait of Hormuz. In a war of attrition, the victor is not decided by who wins a specific battle, but rather by who can sustain the agonizing economic and political costs long enough to outlast their opponent. The fiscal mathematics of this phase are devastatingly lopsided in Iran's favor. Iran is launching suicide drones that cost roughly $50,000 to manufacture, while the United States is intercepting them with Patriot missiles that cost upwards of $1 million each. Every single swarm that Iran deploys burns through American capital at a rate that is fundamentally unsustainable over a multi-year timeline. Iran is operating on an asymmetric logic where they do not actually need to secure a conventional military victory. They simply need to endure until the American public becomes financially and politically exhausted. Looking ahead to the next 72 hours, there are specific developments you must watch closely as this new reality sets in. Expect the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to strike a regional oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz, decisively signaling that their newly established maritime order is completely non-negotiable. Monitor Chinese state media for carefully worded statements regarding the protection of international commercial infrastructure, which will serve as Beijing's subtle transition from a passive bystander to an active stakeholder stepping in to protect its investments. Finally, anticipate a massive, unprecedented coalition of progressive and conservative politicians within the United States Congress demanding formal hearings to push back against the unchecked authorization of military force. If you want to truly understand the gravity of where this is going, map out the international trade corridors and calculate exactly how much time and money it will cost to reroute global logistics around that destroyed bridge. The critical question you have to ask yourself is this: when you destroy a bridge to supposedly isolate an enemy, but that enemy is still heavily armed, flush with cash, and backed by a powerful martyrdom narrative, are you actually winning the war? Or are you just ensuring that the next phase of the conflict will be unimaginably costly for everyone involved? The bridge may be down, but with Iran holding the cash and a restored arsenal, you have to ask yourself, who is really winning this war of attrition? Thanks for watching Jiang Decoded, and I'll see you in the next one.